The scientific method is a process or technique for investigating the world around us. And much of what we know in horticulture, or really anything, is a result of this process. We begin by asking questions about the world around us, doing some background research to formulate a hypothesis, making observations, potentially designing ways in which we can control the different things that happen within our investigation so that we're only looking at a certain variable, and then sharing those results and building from those new questions. So the scientific method is what we'll be using for your midterm. And our midterm, rather than being an exam, is an opportunity not just to choose a topic of your choice that you're really interested in exploring, but also to practice this kind of scientific inquiry in order to learn more about the topic. And then, of course, share that with each other. So your semester research experiment is outlined in this hyperdoc. A hyperdoc is just a Word document where I've got lots of little links built in that you can click on. And so our experiment, your experiment, will start this week in week 8, and we will conduct over the next few weeks. So it's important that your experiment is something that you can, it could be something that's, the length needs to be within a 6-week period so that we're able to conclude. The timeline for the experiment this week will actually choose a topic of interest to us that you personally want to explore. And then we'll do a little bit of background information and research through what's called a literature review. And we'll also formulate a question. So that's kind of what we're doing this week. Between now and week 11, we'll actually be designing an experiment that allows us to explore a particular issue in more detail by creating an experiment that lets us test a variable. For example, if I'm really interested in how light and the amount of light might induce flowering in a certain plant, I might take my bean seeds that I started from one of the previous experiments or another plant that I choose and expose them to different durations of light over the next several weeks to see how that might impact either plant growth or induce or not induce flowering based on what we've learned with photoperiodism. So after choosing a topic and a question you want to explore, you'll design and then carry out the experiment over the next few weeks. On week 11, we'll actually kind of report back on your question, hypothesis, a little bit of the background information you gathered through the literature review, and also the methodology, the procedures that you'll be following for this experiment, and also some of the different scientific papers that you'll be looking at in order to learn more about your topic. And then at the very end, you'll be asked to write a paper. The suggestions for different research topics I've got listed here, and I'm happy to help you brainstorm if you're having trouble choosing one. But the most important thing is you choose something that's interesting to you. I've got some requirements here for the experiment that I want to go over with you. Obviously, it's got to be one that is somewhat short term. We can't look at something that's going to last for a year. So topics like seed viability, where seeds that germinate within a couple of weeks, or experiments with fertilizers, things that can happen within a fairly short, about a month period of time are ideal. Also consider when you're choosing your topic, what's practical. For example, if you're looking at a specific fertilizers, you already have fertilizers for your materials listed in this class and bean seeds, so it'd be fairly easy to do something like that versus you were looking at the growth of LED lights compared to metal halide lights. Those sort of supplies would be very expensive unless you already have access to them. So do consider that as well as the length of the experiment when choosing. Every good experiment must include a control. Again, in this hyperdoc, there's some links if you don't know what a good control is an experiment. But essentially, if I'm looking at the effects of, fertilizer on plant growth, I might have a plant that is not exposed to any fertilizer. And then one plant that's exposed to the recommended amount or double the recommended amount. Or so a control would be something in your experiment to kind of set the baseline. The other thing to consider is in your experiment, only be testing for one variable. So in that experiment I just explained, make sure if you are adding fertilizer to one plant but not the other, you're not also putting them in different temperatures or watering one more than the other, because that could introduce an additional variable to your experiment. So try to keep all other conditions the same. In the end, the data that you'll be collecting, it's up to you. You can measure plant growth a lot of different ways, by size, height, leaf count, weight at the end if you weigh them. Do be sure to make sure that it is quantifiable, i.e. numbers, numerical. If you are looking, for example, if you're doing an experiment on nutrients and nutrient deficiencies, for example, and you use chlorosis, which we'll be learning about next week, as a measurement, you can create a scale for something that is less quantifiable, like color. For example, you could do shades and assign each of those darker or lighter shades a different numerical value. Talk to me if you have any questions or need any help with determining a good quantifiable method. Per college policy, do note that marijuana may not be used in this experiment due to our federal funding and current federal laws. Talk to me if you need help in choosing a plant or plant material, or have any questions in terms of supplies and where you might need to get them. The end result, while you'll be submitting your literature review and your topic, your question in this week's discussion, the next deadline will be on week 11, when you'll be submitting the first half of your paper, and that's a draft. The earlier and more often and more frequent you turn in drafts, the more I'm able to help provide feedback to help you get the grade that you want. The final draft should be at least 3 pages long. And again, in this HyperDoc, you can just click on that link there. I have included the format. A traditional, if you've written a research paper before, this isn't going to look anything. This isn't going to be surprising. But the format includes kind of your title page, an introduction, which would briefly kind of explain your research question. Whoops. A bit of a hypothesis, what you think will happen. Background information, which you'll gather this from the literature review you do this week. Methodologies, kind of the procedures. Your data, which would be your actual kind of data charts. And then your results will be a second section where you're kind of discussing. So this is really just truthfully you're listing your numbers, your data, the dates you collect things, for example, and your results will be more of a discussion on what you're observing. And then finally your conclusion. How does that relate back to your hypothesis? And I'll have in weeks 11 as well as in week 15 some resources if you are less familiar with writing your research paper.